This is Gemara and Yoma Daf Chof Dalit, all the learning for this month of ER. Ani Hashem Reifecha, school is hopefully from tremendous Refuah Shlema, has been censored, L'schos Rivka Bas Basheva, as well as the L'schos Naftali Michal Esther, Mirtz Hashem, the learning of the entire Chavur should be a tremendous Chos Refuah Shlema. As well, Baruch Hashem, Sarah Bas Kila is on the way out of the hospital, but the learning today should be a Schos that she should have a continued recovery. Finally, a man of Megil Chaim and Sarah Shalom Simon Reizel Sarah Bas Kanadi Basim L'chaisei Yisrael Minda Lezim Shalei Shamas Davei Shafiq Shulchan Valdovin Triva Shmuel Ben Til Dinim Khan Reason Din Chai Bezin Le Bracha with Tavmiz Din B'Shemindol Siv Chatovim and Avgai Fesh Asvim and Vegel and Chazun the Huvim and Achmendam and Teiba Besoy Shar Chali Yisrael as well as Chashirach Vataleya Bas Ita. We are on Chov Gimel and Beis, about 8 lines to the bottom. Nima Kitanoi. Let's say it is a machlekes Tanaim. What is a machlekes Tanaim? So we had Rish Lakish and Rav Yochanan who discussed what is the status of the Haramas Hadeshin. We have the Chumas Hadeshin, we have the Hitzas Hadeshin. We have 2 different stages. We have the removal of the ash and we have the carrying it out. Rish Lakish, if you're looking at your screens, you see here bolded about 20 lines up, highlighted, said machlekes b'Hitzah, kach machlekes b'Harama. It's the same machlekes. Which machlekes? Machlekes Tanakama and Rav Eliezer. Tanakama said that the Haitzas Adeshin is an Avodah and therefore it is puzzled with a Kain with a Baal Mum, whereas Rav Eliezer said the exact opposite. Rav Eliezer said it is not an Avodah and therefore it is Kisheira. As you know, we'll just show one Rashi, K'machlikis b'Hitzah, Kishem Rav Eliezer, Machshav Bali Mumin L'Hitzah, Kach Mashil L'Harama. Whereas Rav Yochanan said no, the whole Machlikis is by the Haitzah Sadeshin, but the Harama Sadeshin, the Chumas Sadeshin, everyone agrees in Avodah and therefore will not be allowed to be done by a Kohen that has a Baal Mun. So now the Gemara wants to suggest that the Machlikis, Rish Lakish and Rav Yochanan is a previous machlekes Tanaim Nima Ketanai, says the Gemara, lines to the bottom. Al Bisari, this should hopefully sound a bit familiar. Mal Tamalemer Yilbash. It says you have to wear the shirt and the pants on your flesh. Why does it say Yilbash? Wear them. Just say it should be on your flesh. Says the Gemara, Lavi Misnevis Amni La Rama Divi Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says you have to wear the hat and the belt for the Chumas Hadeshin. Rav Daisa Aimer, no, the Rabbis Big Day Kohen Gadol Yom Kippurim Shekshen the Kohen Hadit. A different halacha is teaching me halacha that the begadim, the garments of the Kohen Gadol, the 4 begadim that he wears while doing the avodah is allowed to be worn by a Kohen Hadyi throughout the year. Amar Rabbi, so before we speak out what is the machlekes Tanaim, Rabbi takes issue and he says shtei tshuvas ba'davar chadod amnei shengoin gadol ozeu amnei shengoin hadyit. It's a different belt, which if you remember a few blot ago we used this as a raya. What was the shitas Rabbi regarding to the belt of the kohen hadyit? The secondly says the Gemara va'oid begadim shen shamim kedusha chamura and the shamim kedusha kala. How's that possible? Begadim that the kohen gadol wore on the holiest day of the year, we're going to let a kohen hadyit wear? It can't be. Ella says Rabbi matam alemer yilbash. What is the pasuk of Yilbash comes to teach me as we move along too? Chav Adalit Amar Aleph, the rabbis as Chakim, the worn out begadim. And then he concludes the pasuk that says V'nichad Sham Melamish Atunin Geniza, that you need to bury them, says the pasuk. Rav Daisa Imer, he says no, Ruine the Kohen Hadit. Really, they're allowed to be worn by a Kohen Hadit. Umatam Eloimer V'nicham Sham. So why does the pasuk say you shall leave them there? You don't have to leave them there. A Kohen Hadit's allowed to wear them. Says the Gemara, Shleishtamish B'hem Yom Kippurim Acher, which refers to the Kohen Gadol, is Yenicham Sham. He can't wear them. A Kohen Hadit can wear them, so he has to leave it for a Kohen Hadit. So now the Gemara speaks out. My lava kamiflagi. This is the machlekes. Marsavar avoidi, marsavar lava avoida. The machlekes whether you have to wear the begadim, whether we're learning out from the pasuk to teach me that you have to also wear the other 2 begadim, is if it's an avoida. But if it's not an avoida, then you do not have to wear the begadim. So seemingly the machlekes, Rish Lakish and Rav Yochanan, whether the Trumas Hadesh, the removal of the ash, is an avoida, and they set an application whether it will be kosher by a kohen with a Baal Mum, is a previous machlekes, which of course we never like to make machlekes amarayim into machlekes tanaim. Answers the Gemara, loy the kuli alma avoidihi. Really, in this machlekes, everyone agrees it's an avoida. And they're arguing how to learn up the pasuk, as Rashi over here points out directly across the kivan the galibak soines bad kaidash umechlesei kaidash ashmina davoidi ubayi kulu. So they're discussing how you learn up the pasuk, but everyone agrees that it is a proper avodah. So Rish Lakish and Rav Yochanan's debate is not a previous machlekes. and therefore between Rav Dais and Rav Yehuda, and therefore there is no problem. Says the Gemara, continuing on the discussion of the Chumas Hadeshen, the removal of the ash. Chumas Hadeshen bekama. How much ash do you have to remove? How much? Says the Gemara. We have two choices. Chumas Meiser Yalfinullah. It's like Chumas Meiser, and therefore it's a 10th. Or Chumas Midyan Yalfinullah, and therefore it is a 100th. And obviously, as Rashi here points out, the fundamental question is, it's called truma, veherim. You have to separate and remove it. So we're looking for a precedent in the Torah that uses the same word, and we found 2 times, trumas meiser and trumas midyan, different quantities. So which one do we learn it to? Says the Gemara, Tashema, Ditan Rav Chia. Says Rav Chia, I'll tell you a different makar. Nemar kan, what does it say about veherim? Whenever lahalon veherim, what's halon malan bekumsai? The koimet, avkan bekoimet, that the quantity of ash that has to be removed is a koimet full. What's a koimet? Kamitza is the 3 fingers. You take off the bottom, the top 3 fingers worth is the kamitza. Rashi here points out a very fundamental question, that it just means the quantity of the kamitza. But you can't actually do kamitza. Why not? Because it's burning hot ash. You can't stick your fingers into burning hot ash. So it says Rashi, it just means you take the ballpark figure what your 3 fingers are, and that's the amount of ash that had to be moved for the Chumas Hadeshen. Amar Rav, says the Gemara, Arba avoidais zachayev aleim misa zrika aktara nisachamayim nisachayayin Levi Omer av Chumas Hadeshen. So now this is the next stage of machlekes with regard to the removal of the ash. Is it a avoida, a proper avoida, so much so that if a non-kohen does the avoida, he is chayev misa? And we're going to see there's a bit of we see now there's a machlekes Rav and Levi, and we're going to have to see how far this machlekes goes. So says Rav, there are only 4 avoidas that if a zar does, he's chayev misa. Of course, he's not allowed to do any other. I mean, maybe he is, we'll have to see. But seemingly he's not allowed to do many other avoidas. As Rashi points out over here, Aval Bisha Kulan Moser Aleim Zar. Still, he's warned about doing every other avodah. Still, Ein Chiyav Misa Elabar Ba'elu. We're discussing primarily the potential terrible punishment of death. So, what are those 4? Says Rav. We have the Zrika, which we know is the final of the 4 big avodas, the Shechita, Zrika, Halach, and Kabbalah. The Zrika, the Haktara, the burning, the Nisach HaMayim, the pouring of the water on Sukkot, the Nisach HaYayin, and the pouring of the wine, the libations. Levi argues and says, Av Chumas Hadeshen, that if a non-Kohen does the Chumas Hadeshen, he is Chayev Misa. But Chayin Tani Levi Masnitan, Levi says the same thing we see in our Mishnah, Av Chumas Hadeshen. So says the Gemara, what is this machlekes Rav and Levi, my time of the Rav? Where did Rav get his din from? It says in the Torah, you, Aaron, and your children should guard the kahuna. L'chol davar hamizbeach, for every matter of the mizbeach, ulemi beis la baroiches, and from the house of the baroiches. Va'avadetem, and you should do the avodah. Va'avadetem avoidas matana. You should do the avodah of the service of a matana, of an application, like tain to give. At tain as kunaschem, I'm giving your kuna. Vazar hakarev, you must. And if a zar does the avodah, he's put to death. So we see over here a bit of a wordy and lengthy pasuk. The pasuk has lots of different words. Obviously, everyone already starts to formulate ideas. What the Gemara is about the darshin. It says l'chol dvar mizbeach. It says the location of it, and then it ends off that if a non-kohen does it, he's going to be potentially liable to death. Says the Gemara, avoidas matana. What do we learn off the fact that the Torah called it an avoida of a matana? Like we pointed out, matana is for the word tain, to give, a positive action. And not a removal. So right there is where Rabbi learns, not the Chumas Hadeshen. The Chumas Hadeshen is the removal of the ash. Says Rav, I'm not Rabbi, I'm saying, says Rav, I'm sorry. Rav learns from the pasuk that there's only a Chiyav Misa. It's a positive action, like a Zrika, like a Haktara. Something that you're actually doing, not merely a removal. Furthermore, says Rav, Va'avadetem, and you should serve, what does that teach me? Avoida Tama, a final avoida which is the end of a set, as Rashi points out, and we're going to see in the Gemara many different potential applications of what is called an avoida Tama. V'loi, the Gemara explained, avoida, and not an avoida that has after it and avoida. So let's see what the Gemara is going to explain. That's where Rav learns out these 4 avoidas. Levi, how does a Levi counter? Rabbi Rachmana, as everyone can imagine, l'chol davar hamizbeach, says Levi, nothing doing. What does the Torah say? L'chol davar hamizbeach, teach me everything. So what does Rav say? V'Rav ahulasuye, something specific. Sheva azay shebifnei v'shemim mitzayra. The 7 sprinklings inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim and of the mitzayra. What does the Levi respond? Levi nafklei midavar v'chol davar, v'Rav davar v'chol davar lo idarish. End of the drasha. So Levi basically says v'chol hamizbeach teaches me everything. Rav is a bit more specific in learning up the pasuk exactly what it's referring to, and avodah, which is a positive action, and avodah, which is the completion of a set. Says the Gemara, ve'ima l'chol davar hamizbeach klal, v'avodah zamet matana prat. Says the Gemara and Rav, 1 second. Why don't we say first is a general statement, l'chol davar hamizbeach, and then there's a specific statement. It says avodas matana prat. Klalu prat, what's the halacha? Ein bechlal masha befrat. We only can include that which is specific. Avodas matana in, avodas siluk loy. Sorry, it's a kasha on Levi. Very good that you, Levi, learned out from the word in the pasuk. L'chol devar mizbeach to include everything. But ask the Gemara, 1 second. The pasuk also specified something. The pasuk specified Klalu prat. What did the pasuk specify? Avodas matana, a positive action. So ask the Gemara on Levi, how could you learn out avodas siluk, a removal? Answers the Gemara, Amar cross. We turn over to Chavdal Beis. Says in the Torah, Ulemi Beis la paroiches va'avanetem Beis la paroiches hu avodas matana v'lei avodas siluk. Only when you're inside, you're Ulemi Beis la paroiches. You're in a Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's when it has to specifically be a positive action and not a removal like the Chumas Hadeshin says Levi. If you're not in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you're outside. Even a removal is going to be included. Obviously, the Mizbeach is outside. We're actually dealing with the Mizbeach and is the big Mizbeach, which is outside everything. So says Levi, that's why it is not included in the specific limud from the pasuk. Says the Gemara, 1 second. So says the Gemara on Levi. So at least you should agree to me that when you're inside, when you're in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that's when it's a proper avodah tama. It has to be the conclusion of a set, and not something that has avodah after it. It's the same drasha, but if you're outside, should be included. Which, I'm sorry, this is now a question on Rav. According to Rav, according to what we just said, we should say avodah sheish achra avodah should also be included. Whereas Rav said no, it's only the final of the set. Says the Gemara, vavatem harda arvei kra. Vavatem includes it all together. So at the end of the day, we have a Levi that's teaching me that the Chumas Hadeshen is Chayim Misa. If a non-Kohen does it. We have Rav that's saying no, there's only 4 avodas that a non-Kohen does, it's Chayim Misa. What's the reason? Because Rav learns out it has to be avodas tama, end of a set. Rav learns out it has to be a positive action and not a removal. Levi learns a removal is included. The siluk, the Chumas Hadeshin, the removal of the ash is Chayim Misa. What does Levi do with the potential Klalu Prat? Says Levi that's only inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But once you're outside, then everything's going to be included. L'chol devar hamizbeach. Says the Gemara, Ba'i Rava. 1 second. Avodah siluk behechal mahu. Till now, he does the Kodesh HaKadoshim all the way in, and we supposed to go all the way out. What about in between in the hechal? Mahu. Lifnei medamnin alei. Oilachutz medamnin alei. Which one is the hechal like? Hadar pashte mi beis, ulam mi beis, mi bayis, ulam mi bayis. Ulam mi bayis. Actually, vav comes to include. Elameata says it comes to include that it's not part, it's considered outside. Elameata zarsha sidr sashulchan. So 1 second. If a non-kohen sets up the shulchan, which is outside, it's in the heichol, lechayiv, he should be chayiv. Says the Gemara. What did we just learn according to Rav? We just learned The Rav comes to say that it's only the Kodesh HaKadoshim is separately. But once you're in the Heichel, you're in an area that a non-Kohen could potentially be Chayim Misa. So says the Gemara, now we're going to have a whole lengthy list of questions. Why aren't all these cases also Chayim Misa according to Rav? Rav only said 4 cases. Question number 1 is, what about the setting up of the Shulchan, the Lechma Abanim? Answers the Gemara, Ika Sidr Bazichen, there's another action after that. And don't forget, according to Rav, it always has to be the end of a set. So anytime we're going to find an avodah that comes afterwards, there won't be a chiyam misa. Just for one moment, let's look at a beautiful picture here. This is the bazichen, as you see these 2 golden little cups over here. These are bazichim inside, between the lechem hapanim, those lechem hapanim, this is the shulchan, and that's a bazichen. So says the Gemara, why isn't there a chiyav Misa, according to Rav, if a non-Kohen does that? Answers the Gemara, you have the arrangement of the Bezichen afterwards, the frankincense. See the Bezichen l'chayiv, okay, so let's say there's Chiyam Misa on that. There's the removal of it and the burning. Says the Gemara, fine. Next case. Zar shesider as a menorah l'chayiv. A Zar, a non-Kohen that sets up the menorah, should have a Chiyam Misa according to Rav. Let's just point for one moment. What's Sider as a menorah? What is setting it up? So there's a fascinating Rashi over here. Rashi says, Rashi learns they didn't just take out the wicks, they didn't just remove the oil and clean it out. They took out the whole cup, the whole top golden cup came out. According to Rashi, other Rishonim argue and say absolutely not. But says the Gemara, why is there a chiyam misa of a non-kohen remains as the menorah? Answers the Gemara, you can see this psila. We have the placement of the wick afterwards. Nasan Silo l'chayiv. So says the Gemara, you should have a chiyam misa if you place the wick. There's a placement of the oil. Nasa shemen l'chayiv, that should have a chiyam misa. Again, each question is, according to Rav, why aren't these cases that a non-kohen will potentially be chiyam misa? Answers the Gemara, we have the lighting of the menorah. So hilik l'chayiv, says the Gemara, a fascinating statement. Hadalaka lav avaydehi. Laka is not avayda, which of course is lots of mefarshim that deal with what does that mean. It's not of avayda, but with regard to our discussion, means that there won't be a chiyam misa for non-kohen that performs such. Says the Gemara, is that true? But Tanya, we know it says in a brayso. It says that the kohen has to put out the fire on the mizbeach. Liman alat sotzas alisa. The kohen has to be the one to light the fire on the mizbeach. Shloi di elo bekohen kosher. We learn out from the pasuk, only a kosher kohen can be the one to light the fire on the mizbeach. Ubikli shares. So says the Gemara. So why are we answering that lighting fires in the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash is an avodah? We see clearly that lighting up the mizbeach is. Answers the Gemara, Hasotza Lisa Avoidehi, but Hadloka Lav Avoidehi. 2 different things. Here is a beautiful picture of the Hatzotza Alita. You see the Kohen lighting up that whole pyre, that whole big tremendous wooden, all the wood on top of the mizbeach. And that is what the Gemara says. That's an avodah, but lighting the menorah is not. And we continue in the Gemara. If a non-kohen sets up the fire on the mizbeach shav chayiv, answers the Gemara, you can say there's shnei gizrei eitzim. Now we know those 2 blocks that they have to put on afterwards. Says the Gemara, okay, see the shnei gizrei eitzim l'chayiv. You can see the avarim. There's the putting on the limbs. I asked the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Zarsha see there shnei gizrei eitzim l'chayiv. He says Rabbi Yochanan actually says that there is a chiyam misa if a zar puts on the wood. Says the Gemara, the machlok you've seen Rav and Rabbi Yochanan is whether the placement of those 2 blocks of wood is the final of the set. That's avodah tama. It's the finishing of the setting up of the mizbeach. Says Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore a non-kohen will have a chiyam misa. Rav disagrees, and Rav says there is that which is afterwards, which is the burning of the things on the mizbeach. And we're going to conclude with the Gemara that says Tani Kavase to Rav, Tani Kavase to Levi. Let's have a raya to Rav and a raya to Levi. Tani Kavase to Rav, that what is only 4 avodas that there's a chiyam misa for not going to do it, and not the Shumas Hadeshin. Avodah shazar chayav alei misa, says the brayso. Zrikas dam beilivnim beilivnei lifnim. If you sprinkle the blood, whether inside or in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, va'amazeh bechatos va'oiv va'mateh va'makter ba'oilas oiv. Someone who burns, sprinkles the chatos oiv, or you squeeze or you burn the oilas oiv, va'menasech shal shugin mayim, you pour the water, shal shugin yain, you pour the wine. Adeshen. And the Brisa, a clear riot to Rav. It doesn't mention Trumas Adeshen. Tanik Vasei de Levi, Avodah Shazar Chayav Aleim, says this Brisa Misa, Hamarim Es Adeshen. There it's the right to Levi, and as well, and that is the right to Rav, that is the right to Levi. We're going to stop over here with the discussion. Today we had when is there a Chiyuv Misa if a non-Kohen does the Avodah? Fundamental machlekes Rav and Levi, whether the Trumas Adeshen is included. We saw that Rav needs an Avodah Tama, it has to be at the end of a set, and that was the reason the Gemara had a whole list of different questions why each one of these isn't including according to Rav, and each one we prove that there's another action afterwards, and we concluded with machlekes Rav and Rav Yochanan with regarding to the placement of the two blocks on the fire, whereas Rav Yochanan felt that now the Mizbeach is finished, there's going to be a Chiyuv Misa for Hazar to do that, whereas Rav disagreed because he felt that the burning of the Evarim and Padarim, etc. is part of the setting up of the Mizbeach. We'll pick up from here tomorrow.